Like, would you say that compared to the economic reform in Chile, which maybe 20, 30 years ago was the poorest country in Latin America, in terms of per capita GDP, they instituted a bunch of, like I think it's the Chicago Boys under Milton Friedman, like some of that style, like free market style economic reform. Now Chile would be regarded by a lot of people as the best economy in Latin America. I guess my question to you is, do you think that that what's happening in Venezuela now is caused by poor economic policy?
Definitely, but
and linked to socialism?
Yes, with that particular part at the end, there is a asterisk to it all, which is the reality of the world that we live in a globalized economy. That despite that any country would have you believe, they are not the sole controllers of the impacts that their economic policies have in their country, because whilst they can control to a great extent through fiscal and other sort of economic policies, what happens in a bubble, they are intrinsically connected to the rest of the world. So there's something to be had, and it is an important point to be had with regards as to why the socialist policies that he tried to implement didn't work in Venezuela at all. It's because of the peculiarities of the economic in Venezuela. So to break that down, definitely, yes, there were poor economic choices and there were poor economic policies, because the perception and the understanding and the assumption that the government had was, well, if we are able to control most of the means of production, then we are able to better distribute them amongst the people. And that is a line of thought within a branch of the left, much more closely connected to communism than socialism, because to a bunch of us, including myself, it feels considerably undemocratic to have that amount of power. He also attempted to separate that power and create a number of various different bureaucratic levels to prevent that from occurring. But that is when the corruption comes into play and essentially makes the whole system rather redundant than actually doing its implementation. But the most important part here, and this is, I think the point that I want to make the most clear with regards to economic policies and why they didn't work in Venezuela, it's connected to the keys of power. Venezuela is and was, when Chavez took to power, a developing country. Despite the fact that it was one of the most fast-growing economies, it was still a fast-growing economy. I remember when I grew up that I had to stop talking over the phone because my family needed to use the internet, and vice versa. And I'm talking about the 2000s. I remember having to use public phones and having to dial up, or having to, things that most of my peers here don't remember, having to dial through a public phone and get the other person to pay for it. Those sort of things, because that infrastructure that a lot of us assume that is part of the developed world didn't exist there. Most of the power that came from Venezuela in order to govern, and you can see this in a lot of the developing countries, came from two places. One, who controlled the military, and two, who controlled the major export production. Now, if you see countries that are already in the developed world that would be considered more progressive, you can think of a lot of the Scandinavian countries. Now, what is their main export? A bunch of it is education. It's individuals, it's skill and mindset. Now, what does that cost? Because that is the main export and the main source of revenue, they are forced to invest more and more in the people. The people become more educated, they can make a better decision for the world, and the societal policies that the government may try to implement. For example, Norway, I have family there, they have a parental leave for both parents, and it's a total of 1 year. You can take it whenever you want, however you want, and it's all paid. That is considered a left policy that to a lot of people in the US it's completely foreign. Why can they do that? Why are they able to implement something like that and other countries like Venezuela can't? It's because in order to get an educated population, an educated country to agree with a policy like that, you cannot just implement it. You have to discuss with them. You have to get them to agree and get them to understand why is it that is so important and necessary for the rest of the world. And they have to morally choose the benefit of it, that even if it comes with an economic cost. That wasn't the case in Venezuela. In fact, far the contrary. Chavez noticed and recognized that he could continuously implement his policies if he kept the people that voted for him poor. He implemented economic policies and educational policies that essentially made it so that people felt that they were more educated. But we now know by the statistics and the amount of research I have done into those policies that they were extremely poorly implemented, and the whole intention was to create that illusion of that progressive intention. And that is essentially why these sort of policies just don't work in a country like that. Because in our case, what is our main export? Our main export is oil. In order to export oil, you don't need people. You don't need to put money towards the people. You don't need to ensure that they are more educated, that they're well kept, that they have better options and possibilities. You just need to pay, like it happened in Venezuela, just sell those areas of the land to an international transnational corporation. They come out and take the oil, pay taxes towards the government, or the government just does it itself, and then that money just goes in and back of the government, never reaches the people. And that is unfortunately what happened in Venezuela.
Okay. Well, let's talk about this a little bit more. If we have a look at like China or the Soviet Union, for instance, like China had tried collectivized farming in a similar way to Venezuela had, with kind of similar results, I would say. Like China had like some bad weather seasons, I think some drought, whatever, and like lots of people died.
Definitely.
Right? The free market argument is that, well, if it wasn't controlled by the collective and you rewarded the people who were making the most food, then a natural hierarchy would have developed whereby more food was produced. Now, like a lot of countries that are in the Soviet bloc, like Eastern Europe, are also like very like natural resource rich countries.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of natural resources exports coming out of Russia, and other countries around there. And I guess the question I'm asking you is, do you think those economic policies, which seem to be similar between Venezuela and other like socialist or communist countries, is part of a pattern of socialism or communism doing a disservice to the people it seeks to lift up?
Yes, so ultimately the outcome, if you just observe at what is the policy, what is the intent, and what outcome created, it is definitely a disservice to the people. A lot of those policies didn't do what they promised or what they tried to achieve. Now, the argument that we put forth is that it is necessary to understand the context where which these policies were tried to implement and the political response that the international community had towards those that ultimately caused the result of whether it worked or not. What do I mean by that? When the time that you're speaking about, so back when we had the Soviet Union and back when we had the Mao China, because the comparison between Mao China and current China is a far more different country, despite the fact that both of them consider themselves to be communist. There's an important point to be had that was during the Cold War. What does that mean to these countries and the capacity of left policies to be occurring? A lot of the underlying assumption of socialism is the perception that whilst it is definitely necessary for an economic system to occur so that individuals can receive, have, and enjoy basic necessities, it is not ultimately what gives quality of life. Other things, community, camaraderie, nationalism, perceptions of the desire of helping other for the necessity of helping other, and because they need it, not because you will get something in return. Those are some tenets of socialism that base the whole essence and make it so that if you don't have that, it won't work. Now, during the Cold War, there was, and to an extent there still is, a debate that went from objective discussion of what the policies could do or not, like the one that we have now, to a propaganda hatred between one side and another, calling essentially names to each other.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because that was the case, especially during the Cold War, where this conversation became extreme to the point where nearly landed in a third war, because of that, a socialist country, and it's essentially the necessity of it all, the same way that a country that focuses their policies on libertarianism, it's the connection that they have with the rest of the world. It's their economic ties, their allies, the trades that they can make between one another. China was isolated for a long period of time, especially during this peace, and the Soviet Union